In Screwed news, imagine you went out into your garden to relieve yourself and a photo was taken of you and shared all over the internet. That's the definition of a bad day. But that's exactly what happened to a very unlucky Frenchman who recently discovered his act of alleviation prominently displayed on Google Maps Street View. After being ridiculed by his neighbors, that Frenchman is now suing Google for infringement of privacy and wants his image taken off Google Maps. Google's lawyers are calling the case implausible. But aside from this case, in which Google camera trucks are snapping pictures of people in sometimes unfortunate situations, what kind of privacy should we expect when we go onto the web in the privacy of our own homes? For example, the Occupy Wall Street movement has relied heavily on the internet, with individuals within the movement using it as an essential organizing tool. Do they have privacy from, say, the Department of Homeland Security tracking them? Apparently not. Discovered within the WikiLeaks Stratford document leak this week is a 5-page report written by DHS about the Occupy movement, its tactics and its demands, information pulled mostly from social networking sites that DHS was tracking. Of course, this sort of file inside the Department of Homeland Security shouldn't really surprise anyone, but my question is, are there similar files about the Tea Party movement and its members who waved around firearms just across the river from the White House? Maybe. I kind of doubt it, but maybe. But let's assume you're not peeing in your garden and you're not an activist and you just use the internet the same way every other American uses it, watching YouTube videos, checking email, Google searching whatever you find interesting. Then can you expect some privacy? No. That's because today Google's privacy policy, or new privacy policy, or lack thereof, kicks into effect. Under the new policy, Google will be able to share user data among all of its services, from YouTube to its search engine to its email service, giving online advertisers an even more detailed look at who you are and what you like to do on the internet. Japan and the European Union have come out blasting the new privacy policy, saying that it violates their laws. So what more do we need to know about this and other internet privacy developments in the news? Joining me from the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC, Ginger McCall, EPIC's Open Government Counsel and IOP Director, and David Jacobs, attorney and EPIC's Consumer Protection Fellow. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being
Thanks
here
for
with
having
us. Ginger, let's start with definitions. Legally, what is privacy and why is it important?
That depends on what you're talking about as far as privacy. If you're talking about privacy vis-a-vis the government, privacy vis-a-vis a private corporation.
Let's define both then.
So with the government, you would probably be talking about the Fourth Amendment, the freedom from search and seizure, unreasonable search and seizure. With private corporations, it gets a little more difficult as far as what the laws are regarding private corporations. Right now, we don't have a good comprehensive privacy law. We need good comprehensive privacy regulation.
David, with regard to private corporations, where do you, well, let me take it back to this. DHS has apparently hired some private corporations to snoop on people. And and so does the Fourth Amendment barrier transport through to that? Or, is this a whole, what's the significance of that, or the consequence of that?
I mean, I think the consequence of that is that people had often assumed, or at least were not aware, that the information that they posted and disclosed to social media networks was subject to being monitored by not only the provider of the network, Facebook or Google, for example, but also by the government, and often without a search warrant. Search warrant is not usually required.
Right. Ginger?
And the legal issue here also is that the Department of Homeland Security, there's a statute that defines what the Department of Homeland Security is permitted to do, what its mission is. And in that statute, Congress has delegated to the agency certain responsibilities. That statute limits what the agency can do, and the statute says that the agency can participate in this sort of situational awareness, but only when there's a natural disaster, man-made disaster, or some sort of national security hook, a legitimate terrorist threat or national security threat.
Kind of a variation on the Fourth Amendment's, reasonable, probable cause and
Yeah, and what we've seen here, we received documents about the Department of Homeland Security monitoring, and apparently there were more documents received recently by another group on Occupy Wall Street. being monitored by the Department of Homeland Security. This is entirely outside of what the Department of Homeland Security is supposed to be participating in. They are monitoring for legitimate First Amendment assembly and speech activity. They're monitoring for criticism of the government. They're monitoring entirely nonviolent groups who are participating in legitimate First Amendment activities.
Back in the 60s, SDS, we discovered after the fact, was not only infiltrated, 60s and 70s, but not only observed, but was infiltrated. And there were provocateurs in some cases. Is there any evidence that DHS is doing anything like that, Ginger?
We've seen stories in the past about law enforcement groups infiltrating peaceful anti-war protester groups, and then classifying people within terrorist screening center databases or fusion center databases.
Wow. David, what are your thoughts on Google's new internet privacy policy?
Well, I think the new privacy changes are going to make it harder for Google users to control the disclosure and use of their personal information.
Can you describe what the old policy was,
Sure.
what the new policy is, so we can get what the difference is?
Sure. Under the old policy, information that Google collected from its users about their use with respect to a particular Google service was kept separate from information that Google collected about users who used a separate Google service. So Google's monitoring of your YouTube searches was separate from what Google knew from your use of Google+, from your use of an Android smartphone, for example. Now, under the new policy, all of that information is going to be combined together into a comprehensive profile of each user.
Are they also looking at Gmail?
They are looking at Gmail. Gmail has actually been read by Google in the sense that it deploys automatic scanning technology that scans the content of your email.
Right, presumably looking for spam, right?
And well,
phishing and things
actually,
like that.
it's usually used to target advertisements. So the advertisements are targeted based on the content of your email. If you send an email to someone about, the dentist, you might see ads for related products.
So you send an email about the dentist, Google reads your email, you go to Google search, and you search on, my neighborhood, and an ad for dentist pops up.
Well, that's the difference now. The ads are no longer contextual. They're based on a profile of you, a profile of your behavior, the way you use each Google service. So the searches you do, or
Might this
location,
not be, the old joke about somebody sitting at the office typing away and suddenly a porn screen pops up or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody is talking about something a lot in email or is doing something a lot at home,
right,
whether it's something embarrassing like porn or something innocuous like NASCAR, whatever, suddenly all their coworkers, if they just watch the kind of ads that appear on the screen when they're doing their normal work, mm-hmm, they're going to know what that person's all about, what they're into, what they're interested in, whether it's, bikinis or stock cars. I mean, do I have that right?
That exact concern was actually raised by members of Congress who said, look, if I'm searching for incontinence, am I going to start seeing ads for incontinence drugs? Google's privacy policy, or diapers, says that they will not target ads based on sensitive information. However, that doesn't mean that the data isn't collected and included
who defines
in your
what's
profile.
sensitive?
Right. Well, health information, for example, I think was included in the profile. But there's actually a related issue, which is that even if you are not collecting sensitive information, if you collect enough non-sensitive information, you can make very accurate inferences about sensitive information, about information that you might want to keep hidden. Perfect example of this was actually just revealed a few weeks ago when there was a story on Target's profiling of users, trying to figure out which shoppers were pregnant or about to become pregnant.
Right, I remember.
And you could tell, based on their purchase history, who was pregnant, in many cases, even before the members of the family knew.
Wow. Ginger, in the minute we have left, Europe is reacting to this. Tell us about that.
Well, actually, I think David would probably be more well-versed on European privacy laws.
Okay.
Sure. Europe has reacted to this. The French Data Protection Authority sent a letter to Google saying, based on its preliminary investigation, these changes appear to violate European data protection law. It's unclear at this point whether further action will be taken, but I think that in the case of the European authorities, that's likely. It's less likely that the Federal Trade Commission, for example, in the U.S., is going to take enforcement action.
The U.S. is much more laissez-faire about all of this.
It is, although they do claim to be monitoring the situation.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, David Ginger, thank you again for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
As the founders of America knew, you can't have a functioning democracy and a politically involved electorate if people can't have privacy and anonymity. This is a really big deal. Keep an eye on how this develops.